myself missed the Saturday dance. Heard they crowded the floor. Couldn't bear it without you. Don't get around much anymore.
Ladies and gentlemen, Oliver Reed.
I always had a view of Oliver being as the guy that was like the man for all seasons, was the rascal rather than the villain.
Gladiators, I salute you.
That was Oliver at his best.
I'll never do that again, Johnny.
I'll do what I like, King.
Do you think I'll let a man put his dirty hands on you?
He could make a very bad film look quite good. Not many actors can do that.
I was petrified of him, because he came in as Bill Sykes. He had to pick me up and shake me, so I was even more terrified.
It was unbelievable. He had amazing presence. But he always had that. He had that when he was 18, 19.
His rapport with the leading ladies was pretty good, really, yes. No question of it.
Oliver had been up all night too. But Oliver had been in the pub.
He dove off the side of the pool onto a table full of glasses. I mean, how he ever survived.
Table collapsed.
These schoolgirls came in and sat down at the table. He said, I'm going to marry the one second to the left.
We can wrap Broomhall up, put in mothballs, but you must go to America.
The fact he didn't do it, I think, is the biggest mistake of his life.
Get away!
Oliver Reed made over 100 films in his career, and yet he will always be best remembered for his no-holds-barred lifestyle.
He was a drinker.
He took his trousers down and went round showing all the tables. Well, the Americans don't like that, you see, and they immediately recast him then and there.
Would I like to have married Oliver Reed? Oh, I think it would have been hell.
Oh, Lorna. Lorna? Oh, nice. Dance.
I don't mind if I do.
Oh, now, we're gonna fly now, over the sky now, come fly with me, over the sea, let's thunder the moose loose.
Ollie's first major break came when he was spotted by Michael Winner and played Tinker in The System, a film which captured the spirit of 1960s youth.
I thought he had these wonderful good looks. He was a bit of a raver with the girls. He was not totally unlike the character of Tinker.
Yeah, I think Winner saw that in Ollie, saw some sort of brooding, male, dominating character who did fill the screen. He was the first to see it.
What if I was to ask you to marry me?
You won't.
No. Come on.
I think it's the first time I ever realised the effect that Oliver was to have on the opposite sex. Because the train pulls into the station and there is Ollie standing on the platform. And as he comes into vision, there was an audible sigh from the female audience, side of the audience. And it was audible and quite tangible.
Hey, Tinker. There's a couple of good ones up this end. Looks like a job for the camera. Your sneakers. That girl in the first-class compartment. Keep an eye on her.
Looking back, that was the first time I realised that he physically had that sort of ability to create a sensation, you know.
But Ollie's route to fame wasn't an easy one. As a child, he suffered from dyslexia and attended over 13 different schools.
I can remember my father reading Ollie's school reports, you know, basically saying that Ollie was unteachable and you know, a disruptive influence on the class. And I think most of his reports indicated this sort of passion of Ollie's not to conform, you know.
Ollie's school days were a mixture of innocence and horror, really. We have this child who is failing to learn, is failing to understand even the basic lessons, but doesn't know why.
I remember a key word was hippopotamus, and I, like horrible little irk, learnt it at the age of 5 or 6 while Ollie was struggling with it and kept piping in. I know how to spell H-I-P-P-O-T-A-M-U-S. I mean, I could just do it like that because it's something I learnt when I was 5 years old, you know. And that kind of really enlightened me to Ollie.
Ollie found an escape from his dyslexia in a growing passion for acting, but he kept his ambitions on hold during 2 years' national service. Whilst on manoeuvres in Hong Kong, he acquired the first props that would help him to achieve his dream.
He came back from Hong Kong with a huge selection of cheap suits, and so he used them to good effect, and so he became a stand-in. And they would say one day, oh, we need a press reporter at Heathrow Airport or something. And that's really where it started. His career started from being an extra.
Alongside work as an extra, Ollie took on a variety of jobs to pay the bills. He was a nightclub bouncer, a cab driver, boxer, and even a mortuary attendant. Desperate to make it in films, he even tried using his family connections.
One of Oliver's first stops after returning to England from the army was to visit his uncle, Carol Reed, the director. Carol Reed's advice was to go to drama school, join a repertory company, get on the stage any way he could.
But Ollie wasn't one for taking advice.
He developed his own plan, and Ollie's way of getting onto the screen was basically to bed every production assistant or every production secretary that he could find.
She was an assistant to the casting director of a film, and they had a night together, woke up in the morning. Oliver gave her his picture, and there it was. When the casting director came in, slap on the top of the pile. Now, that's pretty ambitious. It's not a great story, I have to say, but it did tell you a little bit about how ambitious he was.
Animals dressed as human beings. Smash, smash, smash.
His dating skills brought him roles in a series of early 60s B-movies with British studio Hammer, playing a familiar range of thuggish stereotypes.
I'm an Ashby.
And he's probably one of the few top actors who have never, ever set foot on a stage.
I mean, I went in the army and I came out. That was a great acting school. And I came out and they said, you should go into the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. And I said, no, thank you very much. And then they said, you should go into rep. And I said, no, thank you very much. And I spent 5 years in my local pub.
He had been training himself with people for a long time and playing those sort of roles, whereas we'd all been at drama school.
I remember seeing a few of the early roles Ollie had as an extra. And extras are meant to be sort of in the background, but it was very difficult to keep Ollie in the background.
One such role introduced him to Irish actress Kate Byrne, who became his first wife.
They met on a Cadbury's milk tray ad, and she was the one who was doing well, and he was just trying to make a few bob. And that was the beginning of it, under hot lamps and chocolates melting.
The curse of the werewolf that was laid on a baby who grew into a man possessed by a monster.
Ollie's big break came in a Hammer film, The Werewolf. He was basically the only actor who the makeup artist had decided looked like a werewolf. The sketches were done, the dummy of the face was done, and they were looking for an actor who could be turned into a werewolf the quickest and the easiest way.
You say you love me, will you marry me?
Yes. Yes, I will.
I think they spent hours on his makeup. I mean, I think 4 or 5 hours to get the... And you see these fangs developing and the hair developing on his face.
Help me! Get away! Get away! Get away! No!
Ollie's career had finally begun to take off, but at the expense of his relationship with his young son, Mark.
Ollie was becoming very busy and very successful. And at Mark's point in life where he was conscious of his father and whatever, Oliver didn't have an awful lot of time. And I can remember, I can remember a personal instance. For instance, we were walking along the road and Ollie drove by in his car, and we waved and sort of said, and Ollie just sort of drove straight by. And I can remember Mark sort of being very upset by that.
I used to look at my dad on telly and I thought everyone's father was on telly. I didn't realise it was so very different to what other people were going through. It was only in later years that you suddenly understand the difference. This is Homefield Road. Homefield Road is where I first have memories of living, and this is where I nearly burnt the house down. I lit a few comics and thought nothing much of it until the comics started to really flame up. And then I closed the door and left there and went into my parents' room, and my father said, "Mark, go back to bed." And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because they've fired my room."
Oliver, in his own way, of course, loved Mark, but didn't have the time. I mean, you know, he was away filming. You know, I can remember Mark being shipped off on a plane with you know, people to go and see his father. You know, it was always at long distance.
His upbringing was very Victorian, and therefore he didn't really have that that ability to be tactile, which is remarkable when you consider that he made a profession out of being emotional. It's the odd way, isn't it?
Ollie had also become a familiar figure on the Wimbledon pub circuit. To help demonstrate his drinking prowess, he devised a game called the Wimbledon 8.
They would race to the next pub, and so they go round the 8 pubs around Wimbledon Common. One circuit was easy, 2 was getting worse, and only Ollie either wanted or could set off on a 3rd circuit. 16 pints in under an hour and a half. That's an incredible intake, and it's really no wonder that only Ollie ever wanted to start the 3rd round.
Ollie and his brothers set up a drinking club called the Portley Society.
You know, you had to go through dreadful initiations of drinking large quantities of wine out of a ghastly, mouldy glass and things like that, you know.
I just knew of it, and I knew of screaming wives asking where their husbands were, because he'd called a Portley meeting.
We had this unbelievable sort of sense of secrecy about it, so we'd make people think there were sort of drugs and hookers and the most unbelievable debauchery going on. We used to get a Chinese takeaway. A lot of drink.
We had lots of fondness for lots of pubs, but this was one of them, Crookerville and Wimbledon. My earliest memory of a real introduction to drink was when I was about 12. He was going off to one of the locals and asked me if I wanted to join him. So I said, yeah, sure, absolutely. And I ended up drinking 6.5 pints of their bitter. And on the way home, he kept on looking at me and not knowing whether he should be proud or call the doctor. I have to say that afterwards I was very ill, but that was my first real introduction to it. I remember sort of clutching the porcelain, hugging the loo all night, just wanting to die. And him coming and sort of offering me pillows and duvets, and all I just wanted was to be left alone.
Ollie's first major film had problems even before it hit the big screen.
Michael Winner had terrible trouble with the censor. Various scenes were cut and the violence, and there was a scene of Oliver and I at the end, near the end of the film, and I had virtually no clothes on. And at one point, the whole scene was going to have to be cut. And I was absolutely devastated and upset when Michael Winner came and told me. And Oliver Reed heard about this and turned up with the most enormous bunch of flowers. He was a nice guy.
You took me.
Ollie had a strange relationship with women. I mean, you know, I don't think he treats women or has treated women very well.
He liked them as sex objects, he liked them as partners, he liked them as pretty people to be on his arm when he went to a premiere or he went to a party.
George Bernard Shaw once said at a cocktail party, he was at a cocktail party, and there was this young lady who was very much in love with him, and she was a bit of a socialite. And she came up to him and said, "George, would you sleep with me?" And he said, "Well, certainly, madam." He said, "Would you sleep with me?" She said, "Certainly, George." He said, "For 25 guineas?" She said, "Certainly, George." He said, "What about 2 shillings and 6 pennies?" She said, "What do you think I am, George?" He said, "Madam, what you are has already been established. We're simply haggling about the price." And I think that's true. I think that's true of a lot of ladies in life.
I don't know. I never thought of him at that time as a womanizer. Not at all. He was an exceptionally attractive young man, but I never thought of him as being a womanizer in any unpleasant way.
You do love me, don't you?
Yes, of course I do.
Certain sure?
Certain sure.
Till the day you die?
Till the day I die. Bye-bye.
It was wonderful, Dick.
Oh, good, good.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.
I guess that ending up in bed with Oliver Reed was pretty good. I think there's probably a lot of women who would have given their eye teeth for that.
Have you ever fallen in love with a leading lady?
Yes.
Have you?
Oh, I think it's essential.
Well, all of them.
His rapport with the leading ladies was pretty good, really, yes. No question of it.
Just as Ollie was becoming a bona fide pin-up, a casual drinking session led to an incident that very nearly wrecked his whole career.
Ollie was in the Crazy Elephant in town, and there'd been some guys giving him stick. He was quite a visual face. And Oliver never shied away from back chat. So he was upsetting them, they were upsetting him, and they were bad lads. I mean, Oliver obviously had provoked them or had done nothing to shy away, and they thought, we'll have him. And he went into the toilet, and Ollie said, "You come to help me have a pee, have you?" And they just went at him with glass, just all over him. Over his face, basically, to make sure he wouldn't work again.
Luckily, his scars didn't seem to matter to the man who was going to make him a household name.
So at the end of the interview, I didn't speak to him too long, because he hadn't done much. It didn't take him long to tell me what he had done. And so he was just going to get up and he said, "Well?" And I said, "Well, what?" He said, "Well." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "What about this?" And there was a big scar there. And I said, "So what? Do you want the part?" He said, "You mean this doesn't matter?" I said, "No. No, in fact, I think, it enhances your glamour."
What's that?
It's Debussy.
At the time, Ken Russell was looking for an actor to play the lead in his next major project, a film profile of the composer Debussy.
Does anybody want to shake to Debussy?
I'd noticed that Oliver Reed, who I'd seen on the television on a Top of the Pops panel, looked extraordinarily like the young Debussy, looked incredibly so.
As long as you stay.
Debussy finally allowed Ollie to shake off the remnants of his Hammer image, adding art house sensibilities to his commercial appeal.
It was fantastic for Ollie. He was absolutely flattered, a little bit wary, can I do this? But Ken, I think, in typical Ken fashion, simplifies everything.
And that's when we devised a method of working, because it was a very moody film, but there are various degrees of moodiness, and we worked that out between us. If we wanted just a slight sort of simmering look, we called that Moody 1. Moody 2 was a little more intense.
A self-opinionated bore, and what is worse to me, tone deaf.
And Moody 3 was glowering and dangerous, and that stood us in good stead through every film we ever worked on. When I did another film with him where he also resembled Dante Gabriel Rossetti, a pre-Raphaelite painter. So I cast him in that. Still played it like Debussy, but never mind.
Preference granted.
Michael Winner, Ken Russell, obviously were the two leading factors in Oliver's development. In fact, I remember Richard Harris sent Oliver a pair of crutches, one with the name of Michael Winner and the other with the name of Ken Russell. Sent them to Ollie's home saying, "You better use these, Ollie boy, otherwise you're going to fall flat on your ass."
It was a silly thing to say, and it was totally untrue anyway, but, we're all vulnerable, and, that was below the belt, but I think it did hurt him.
Realising he needed help to manage his career, he turned to his immediate family.
So one of the first things we did was to try and make Ollie more famous. And this was largely making use of things that Ollie gets up to in his private life. So it was an engineered thing in a way, have to admit.
You once said, well, you said it more than once, that the image that the press got of you was of kind of boozy ram.
Yes.
You know, we made Ollie notorious, and then it feeds on itself in a way.
Ollie's reputation as a hellraiser was soon firmly established, but the bad publicity was now beginning to damage his film career.
He was considered for the replacement James Bond, but Cubby Broccoli decided, they analysed Ollie Reed, they looked at his old films, and they decided that his reputation as a hellraiser overshadowed what his reputation as the new Bond should be. And they decided that they would have to spend so much time and money repackaging Ollie in the squeaky clean James Bond image that he was turned down.
Charles Dickens' classic tale of a boy's adventures in strikingly different backgrounds of 19th century London was a milestone in world literature that inspired a stage musical, Oliver.
But for his next major film role as Bill Sikes, the ultimate Dickensian villain in Oliver, his growing off-screen reputation was a definite bonus.
Oh, I was petrified of him, because he came in as Bill Sikes, in all the gear and all the makeup. I think the first scene I ever had with him, he had to pick me up and shake me, so I was even more terrified. I never quite knew how to take Ollie, because he could sort of change very quickly and almost in mid-sentence, so you never quite knew whether he was having a joke with you or he was being serious.
It was unbelievable. He had amazing presence. But he always had that. He had that when he was 18, 19. Amazing charisma.
By the end of the 60s, Ollie had become one of the leading British actors of his generation, but his marriage was falling apart.
It was tough, very tough for her. And yeah, I saw one or two things. There was no hitting, but it was bad. Ollie was treating her bad, and I think he and Kate split up largely because, yeah, he was, whatever you like to call it, yeah, with somebody else.
That somebody else was Jackie Darrell, a dancer.
They met on Oliver the film, and she became pregnant and had Sarah. And I always remember Oliver knocking on the door about 3 o'clock in the morning one day. Bottle of champagne, tin of caviar. And I opened the door. He said, "I've done it, Dave. I've done it." I said, "What on earth are you talking about?" He said, "I've got a daughter." And it was Sarah.
Every morning, sort of getting up, and Mum would plait my hair, and then she'd say, you know, go and say goodbye to your father. This is when he was at home, and used to go and bye-bye, Daddy, kiss him on the cheek. And he was always like, "Now be as naughty as you can." And that was my send-off to school every morning. It was like, you know, most people are like, "Now make sure you do your times tables and you get your sums right, and I want to see your report at the end of term." And it's like, be as naughty as you can. He had no interest whatsoever in my school report.
In many ways, because he was larger than life, it made their relationship with their dad larger than life, and unlike most people's relationship with their dad. And that's in good ways and bad ways.
You know, he goes, "Would you really want me to come home with a side parting and a briefcase and a suit like every other daddy, or would you like a daddy like me?" And I was always like, "No, I just want a daddy like you." But I think there were times when you just thought, "Oh, I wonder what normality's like."
The teachers are very good about finding out what families are like, aren't they? So what does your daddy do, and how they ask these little questions of children?
My daddy drinks gin and tonic and eats hot curry.
Yeah. So it certainly wasn't normal.
Yes.
Nothing about it was normal.
Alongside Oliver, Ollie had continued to work with Michael Winner on a string of successful films, including The Jokers and I'll Never Forget What's His Name. When he needed a soft-hearted lead for his next film, Winner once more chose his favourite leading man.
On Hannibal Brooks, Oliver had to act with this elephant, and actors tend to go overboard when working with animals. And they said to me before the film started, "Oliver is sleeping with the elephant tonight." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, he's sleeping in the tent with him and in the straw." So he slept 3 nights with the elephant. Elephants are very nasty animals, I must tell you. The elephant didn't give a damn that Oliver Reed slept with him, I can assure you. It didn't cement the relationship in the slightest. But Oliver decided this elephant was in love with him, which it certainly wasn't, you know. In fact, Oliver had to walk along these mountain ledges where you had a sheer drop one side and a solid rock wall the other. And all the elephant did was try and squash him to death against the wall. I said, Oliver, this is your friend, and he's trying to kill you. I said, you could have slept in the hotel for those 3 nights. Did no good at all.
In Hannibal Brooks, director Winner has purposely reversed the expected casting procedures. Rugged Oliver Reed plays Hannibal, a violence-hating, reluctant soldier.
Look, I didn't do all this just to start a war. But now I'm this close. I'm not going to lose.
Ollie decided to spend his growing wealth on a place in the country. He and Jackie set off to buy a paddock for their horses, but ended up with something slightly grander.
Once upon a time, this was a monastery, a secluded retreat for the Little White Fathers, a rambling Victorian mansion standing in 50 acres of manicured lawns, sweeping downland and concealing woods. Its latest inhabitant is hardly a monk, though. Oliver Reed, international superstar. His principal helpers, Dobbo, boozing companion, general factotum, confidant.
It was moonlight, you know, and we walked around, and it looked twice as big, really, and I thought, oh dear, what have you done? He said, I told you I wanted somewhere to put my horse, he said. So that's it, you know, I bought them all.
56 bedrooms, 50 acres of grounds, and a lake. Even a superstar's pocket money tends to get stretched in a place like this. The house costs about £400 a month just to heat in winter. The continuing costs of renovation would give even a building society a headache, and you could build a mansion on what it costs just to re-fence the place.
Wild, wild gardens being restored, the house being restored. So Ollie pulled in these film crews, and they were masters at replicating old plasterwork and whatever, you know. It took years and a lot of money.
Dave the Rave, I think, was there. He was a plumber. He was there for about 8 years. Jack Sparks, Pete the Paint. I mean, for years.
It was a huge
years.
project.
It was mammoth, and a huge workshop, which was like a playground again. But all these boys who were trying to get on with it, and all he wanted to do was take them for a beer.
He'd bring all his workmen down and, you know, treat them all to drinks, and I think that sometimes there was more drinking than there was work done.
Pubs are good places. I've even got one in my own house, actually. Just a small one, which is was there. And there's lots of memories of Ollie in there as well, on the wall, here and there. There's actually one here where Ollie was somewhat inebriated.
We're only going to have a couple, Jenny. We'll be back. And I'd upstairs cook dinner, put it on the table, and about 3 days later they might come back.
He could drink a heck of a lot, Ollie. I mean, you could go 3-4 days on, you know, non-stop, no sleep. And by the end of the 4th day, he's probably, I mean, he could get really noisy.
But they'd always be there on a Friday, all with guilty looks on their faces, you know, and I come in with the briefcase, with the money, and pay them all out. And Ollie would say, you know, look what we've done this, we've done that. And it went so slowly and cost so much money, you know.
For the next 10 years, Broome Hall was the focus of Ollie's life, and he was much more comfortable away from the glamour and glitter of showbiz.
Ollie was very generous of heart to people he loved, you know, but they were not people in the business, you know. I mean, except for, you know, as I've said before, Michael Winner and Ken Russell, the only 2 friends he made in the business, I think, true to say. All his friends were lovely, lovely ordinary people, you know.
Oliver would always say, this is Bill and Jen, to any of the stars on the set or wherever. And wherever we went, you know, it was same hotel next to him. You know,
He used to call us family,
yeah,
whenever he
yeah.
introduced us.
He didn't like pretentious people who dressed up and posed. And coming from an actor, it was rather strange because he posed all the time, you know.
Meanwhile, Ollie's career continued on its successful streak. Ken Russell offered him the part of Gerald Critch in Women in Love, playing alongside rising stars Glenda Jackson and Jenny Linden.
I arrived on the set sort of totally tensed up, ready to go, and had tried 100,000 ways of saying a line, like I had a line in Women in Love, see what a flower I brought you. And I would be going, see what a flower I brought you, see what a flower I brought you, see what a flower I brought you, etc. for hours, you know.
See what a flower I found you.
Now, Oliver had been up all night too. But Oliver had been in the pub. He'd been drinking with the crew.
Would you like tea here, or would you rather go across to the house?
Oh, can't we have a rowing boat and get out?
Get out.
Well, you see, we know hardly anyone here. We're almost complete strangers.
Oh. Oh, I'll see to it that you're set up with a few acquaintances.
I was thinking, it's a very funny thing. But, I mean, it doesn't sound as if Oliver studied the script at all, knows what the scene means, and it doesn't sound as if he understands it, you know, all of 27 years of age.
Do you handle a boat pretty well?
Pretty well.
Yes. We both row like water spiders.
Then there's a small light canoe of mine I didn't bring out for fear somebody would drown themselves. Do you think you'll be safe in that?
Was I mistaken? And I found out when I watched the rushes. Oliver, with his charisma, he'd stolen the scene.
In the era in which he worked in British films, there weren't many parts for an actor like him. And he was constantly in not very good films. But when you suddenly saw him in Ken Russell's Women in Love, you realized that he was an actor who could absolutely stand with a very fine actor like Alan Bates and be absolutely as good, if not better. And that's a pretty good tribute to him.
Everyone in the cast and crew knew that the script of Women in Love contained several scenes that could upset the censor, including one involving naked male wrestling. For Ollie and his co-star Alan Bates, it was not an easy scene to film.
At the time that I remember it, there seemed to be a huge amount of fuss. Massive. And there was a lot of will they or won't they.
They both had something in common. They didn't want to do the scene. So they both went to a pub and drowned their sorrows and said what a sod I was and how awful I was, and they weren't going to do this and they weren't going to... And Reg egged them on, and so they drank more and more. Well, eventually, of course, they had to go out and relieve their bladders. So standing side by side in the outside loo in the moonlight, this is according to Reg, they glanced left and right and they saw there wasn't a great deal to choose between them. So, and that was their main worry, I gather, that one might have been more of a man than the other. So everything was equal.
It came to the day, and Alan was terrified. I lost 1.5 stone.
Alan Bates?
Yeah, a 1.5 stone because I was so fat and I didn't want to appear to look fat. I wasn't worried about my John Thomas. I mean, God, I don't know. But I stopped in at a pub on the way at 7 o'clock in the morning. We knocked them up and I bought 2 bottles of vodka, gave 1 to Alan, 1 to myself, and we did the fight. But it was very frightening. Of course it was. How do you start?
Well, you can't do much in a stuffed shirt.
All right, let's strip and do it properly.
Very good. Now, you come at me any way you want, and I'll try and get out of it.
Admirable.
I was hugely embarrassed by that constantly, because, you know, I got to see his bottom.
And his willy.
And his willy. I forgot about that. He wouldn't like that, would he?
No.
Missed that. Blinked and I missed it.
The cinema was empty except for 2 old dears in it who weren't expecting any nude wrestling. Never seen any in their lives or even imagined such a thing possible. Anyway, so he thought, I wonder what the reaction's going to be. This guy was sitting right behind them when they see the scene. And so the scene came and they went on and they were still as rocks. They didn't move. And then it came to an end and the men were lying panting on the ground. And one turned to the other and said, "Lovely carpet." And it was indeed a lovely carpet.
Ollie's insecurities as an actor were never more obvious than in his relationship with Glenda Jackson.
And you never will love me, will you?
Why do you torture me?
Oh, I don't want to torture you.
I think she's a very old-fashioned piece of Lawrence's highly sentimentalised view of what he would call a sex war, I suppose.
And this is basically a conflict between a headstrong man and a very headstrong woman, and this so often, in my experience, not my personal experience, ends in tragedy or a great deal of strife.
Glenda was so different to Ollie and knew it, and it was a difficult relationship, always a little bit strained, I felt, between them. There was a lot of mutual respect. I think Glenda was aware of what Oliver could do to a camera, and that he was a pretty good actor too. And Oliver was very aware of Glenda's abilities.
I have to observe that you and Glenda Jackson have really hit it off. Do you have any special feelings about this partnership?
I think that Glenda and I, from the days of Women in Love, I think that we make art films. I will continue to make films with Glenda Jackson. Besides that, she's got great knockers.
Actually, during the filming, they got on very well, because she did give everything, you know, and he met his match. But he stood up to her, and they had an interesting sort of relationship, but it didn't go beyond the screen. You know, as soon as it was cut, she was off doing her thing, and he was off, so it was just there. But there was a sort of charisma between them, and she was definitely, Glenda was a challenge to Oliver. He did have to pull out some stops and sometimes go as far as Moody 4, which was very rare.
This is very peaceful, Oliver. When you're actually back home, do you get much time down here? In this particular part of the grounds?
I don't fish a lot down here.
Ollie's earnings from Women in Love were plied into the ongoing restoration of Broom Hall, his own private piece of paradise.
What is the history of the house, Ollie?
Oh, it's been a house here since 1010, and then it was added on to 1744, and then it's Victorian, and the whole thing is... Oh, damn that gin and tonic. The cellars are empty of wine. Than I do.
He just loved the birds and the bees and everything else, and he used to enjoy. I suppose it was better than the work he was doing, really, because he never liked filming. He said, "I hate it, Dobbo. I really hate it."
He just used to come out and look at it and the size of it and think, this is mine. And as I say, every day will be a new thing for the garden, more so than the house, I think. It was always, you know, the garden.
It was the Magic Garden that he loved. We had this garden there, we didn't Magic Garden. It was like a rockery with all these little paths, and it really was. And I remember as a child, he used to sort of take me down, and we used to be like on a Saturday morning, he'd say, right, we're going to go off and we're going to look for fairies. And we'd go down, and he'd say, right, you know, and there's a toadstool there, and that's where the fairies sit under when it rains. And then if you look inside this little bluebell, that's where the fairies sleep. And it was just this amazing imagination.
There was always the child in him, the ability to see things, and not to just be hardened by life, but to be able to see through things.
He emptied the swimming pool.
Yeah, had a party in the swimming pool.
And that was quite a night, that was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Quite a night.
Most people have pool parties out, you know, around the pool. This was actually in the pool, all the water had been let out, and it was actually a party in the pool, and everyone had to be dressed in red, white and blue, wasn't it?
Trestle tables and lights around the outside. And about 3 in the morning, they filled it full of dry ice.
Yeah.
We had these heads just poking up and down through the dry ice.
Yeah.
Amazing party.
Well, further down, if it's there's the swimming pool. God,
yeah.
look at it.
Terrible, isn't it?
Yeah, he dove off the side of the pool onto a table full of glasses. I mean, how he ever survived, I don't know.
I mean, there must have been 100 glasses on it.
How again he didn't kill himself, I do not know.
And he just jumped up.
And not a mark on him.
No.
He had that sort of luck.
He had more lives than a cat, I think.
Do you ever actually regret what you landed yourself with?
I regret that I'm not allowed to spend more time here. And that is either because nobody wants to employ me in this country, or that it becomes more and more difficult to be able to earn enough money, or keep enough of the money that one does earn, to afford one the facility to be able to keep up something like this.
But the cost of Broom Hall began to exceed even a superstar's budget.
What happened was the insurance companies started to kick in. There were 1 or 2 incidents with directors and producers. He got a reputation for being difficult. How on earth he could have got that, I don't know. But he did. And so insurers started taking a dim view of hiring Oliver Reed, and things needed to be scaled down. And I remember David, you know, had a very difficult time then having to persuade Oliver, you know, we've got to scale down.
You know, it got very serious, and I asked Jackie and him to appear one Friday when I went down to pay everyone, and I took them into the Ivory, and I said, look, we can wrap Broom Hall up, put it in mothballs, but you must go to America.
Oliver passed up endless opportunities in America. I think he was afraid to go. He was offered the Robert Shaw part in Jaws. That would have made him a major star. But he was frightened, I think, to leave where he was quite successful and happy.
He didn't want to go. He didn't want to go. Why? Because he felt that Hollywood was a bunch of posers. He didn't want to be part of the Hollywood studio network where he had bosses, but he also felt that it was a life that was riddled with falseness, pretense.
Maybe it's better to be a big fish in a small pond than, you know, a small fish in a big pond, which he would have been to start with, but I'm sure that would have launched him on a big Hollywood career. In fact, he didn't do it. I think it's the biggest mistake of his life.
The pressure on Ollie to earn enough to pay for this extravagant lifestyle was also taking its toll on his relationship with Jackie. By 1982, she'd had enough.
Jackie Darrell announces that come the new year, their relationship is over, she's moving out. Within 4 months, Broom Hall had been sold, he'd moved down the road to a farm, and that part of his life was over.
Mr. Oliver Reed.
With his acting career on the slide, Ollie was finding alternative employment as the chat show guest from hell.
Come on, off. Think you were hard, man. Go off out of it. I was known as a wild one by all the folks around. I was known as a wild one by all the folks around.
A series of spectacular performances culminated in an unforgettable appearance on Aspel & Company in 1986.
I was behind the screen, so, you know, so when Ollie would appear, the band would strike up and Ollie would come out, you know, and we'd be sitting there with the other guests, you know, having an orange juice, you know, behind the scenes. There was never anything more powerful than that.
The Aspel chat show was a classic example of Oliver not feeling comfortable, and don't think he was that drunk at all. Acted unbelievably pissed. I think he took a crate of orange juice out, a jug of orange juice.
Ladies and gentlemen, Oliver Reed.
And I can vouch for the fact it was orange juice, and that he had been perfectly sober moments before. That's not to say I haven't been present when he is out of his mind, but that's when I say it's very difficult to discern the real Ollie when he's acting and when he really was pie-eyed, you know. Difficult to tell sometimes.
He walks off the set, he winks at the researcher, picks up the apple juice and says, "Did I overdo it a bit?" And Ollie was simply delivering what everyone wanted. He was known as a drunkard, he was known as a naughty boy, and he was delivering.
He may have been delivering what the public wanted, but these drunken antics were rapidly destroying his film career.
I think his biggest mistake was to play along with this silly reputation of his of being a hellraiser and a drunk and a buffoon. But I think a lot of people who, when they're cast in that way, decide, okay, I'll give them what they want. It may make me, you know, I'm a celebrity anyway, it may make me more of a celebrity. That was a big mistake and it wasn't worthy of him.
Oliver, we've been talking about what you would do if you ruled the world. Do you have any ideas what you would do if you ruled the world?
I think I'd like to be Donald Duck.
OK.
But if I wasn't Donald Duck, who's that fellow with a big black shiny nose? Mickey...
Mice?
Mice. Ah, Mickey Mice. That's who I'd like to be.
I always felt slightly uneasy when I watched him because I knew that there was another side to it. And to see him being drunk or behaving unnecessarily made me sad because I think he was a nicer guy than he let himself be, or that people let him be because of his reputation. What they wanted was that hellraiser.
The image was everything at that stage, and you know, he was perpetuating the image. There wasn't a lot of substance to go with the image because the films had dried up, but if he kept performing, kept his face in the place, maybe the films would come along and he would still be a big name, and we just fundamentally missed that point, you know. But you know. carry on.
In private, Ollie showed a very different side to his public hell-raising image.
He's a very shy guy, which again is one of those parodies. If you think that the perception of him in the press was this very bullish, very powerful, and he was a very bullish and very powerful individual, but that was a way of overcoming this incredible shyness, in the same way as having a few beers was.
You know, he could be the shyest person on earth. I mean, excruciatingly shy, to the extent that, you know, if I was in a pub and I laughed, he would say, "Shh, you're making too much noise."
If ever he felt awkward about a situation, then the first thing he'd do, I mean, we all do it, you tend to hide behind a glass, but he just,
Speak
like
for yourself.
all of us, he just enjoyed the buzz.
Yeah.
You know, it was more fun, but it was very social. I mean, you would never found him in a cocktail bar in London. You know, he was going to be in the working man's side of the nearest pub because that's where he was going to meet someone who had a twinkle in their eye and a story to tell.
If this behaviour wasn't enough, Ollie was about to drop another bombshell. He'd fallen in love with a schoolgirl.
He said, I'll show you the girl I'm going to marry. So he dragged me off to a pub, and we were there for about half an hour or so, and then these schoolgirls came in and sat down at the table. And he said, the ducklings had just come in. He said, I'm going to marry the one second to the left. I said, you've got to be mad. I said, you know, you get yourself chucked in a prison thinking things like this. He said, no, but she's gorgeous. Look, she is absolutely wonderful.
Next thing I know, Oliver's saying, we're getting engaged to Josephine. I couldn't believe it. I absolutely couldn't believe it. It made no sense to me at all. And the whole family was shaking their heads. You know, I mean, Oliver's, you know, behaviour is sometimes eccentric, would be a mild word for it, but bizarre. But this was just incredible.
She became 16 and eventually they got together and eventually they got married, and it was a very happy marriage.
And you are now husband
I thought that she would be downtrodden, and she certainly wasn't that. I mean, even for a young lady, she obviously has learned as she's gone along, but no, very good, and very good for him.
They had a great life together. I mean, she was madly in love with Ollie and Ollie was madly in love with her.
You might want to say something intelligent.
As the relationship developed, I've understood it more and more. And actually, funnily enough, since Oliver died, I've got to know Josephine quite well. And I can absolutely understand it now.
Josephine would often travel with Ollie on location. She was with him on the set of Castaway in the Indian Ocean. He was chosen by director Nick Roeg for the part of Gerald Kingsland, both because and in spite of his reputation.
I found him very easy to play because his psychology is exactly the same as mine. Her idea of a desert island is to immediately start lighting fires and building houses and putting up bookshelves. And Gerald's whole idea of living on a desert island was to get away from putting up bookshelves, and he just wants to roll a cigarette and lean against a log and look at the birds. But she's very much into suddenly making the island into a home.
Well, Nick Roeg, I think, chose him for Castaway because he wanted to have someone who was not obviously glamorous in that part. He was a man who was inviting a beautiful girl onto an island, not knowing whether they were going to fall in love or whether they were going to be just companions. And I think Nick Roeg realized that Ollie Reed was actually a very good actor and could actually do this part without falling into the kind of Hollywood romanticism that might have destroyed the film.
It was strong. It was a very meaty part. I thought actually the career, which had dipped a bit, or quite a bit until then, would really take off after Castaway, and I was surprised when it didn't, but there was still this undercurrent of big producers not wanting to back films that he was part of.
I think the trouble with his career was partly himself and partly the British film industry's negative attitude towards his type of acting.
Away from the cameras, Ollie and Josephine found a simple and surprisingly sedate happiness in rural Ireland, where he immediately felt at home.
He'd been across to Ireland looking at a place, and I said, why, Ollie? You know, this was a lovely place. He said, I'll tell you why. He said, you go into the pub here, he said, and you tell them a story, and I'll wait an hour, And I'm suddenly found I'm telling the same story again. He said, I didn't mean to, but I know I am. And they're looking at me because they're so kind to me. And they're hearing the same story for the second time, and no one's saying a word. He said, you can't stand that. He said, you go to Ireland and you tell the story, and then you tell the story, and then, for fuck's sake, Oliver, stop all that. We heard that before. He said, that's what I love. That's what I love. You're only as good as the stories you tell, and the character you are in the pub. It doesn't matter who you are, what you think you are, or what you do. You're only as good as the last story you told.
Ollie soon made many friends in the local bars.
He loved Churchtown.
He loved it here.
He loved it here. He loved it here. He loved it here.
Loved it here, no, he did.
And he just loved the fact that people accepted him for who he was here and what he was and didn't judge him.
What the news media portrayed him as, that was totally unreal. There was a real nice man behind it. He was a gentleman to his wife.
A few drinks and had a laugh and never done anything to anybody or never upset anybody here, never insulted anybody here. He just did good things, really.
He loved the rural Ireland and the people. He loved the rural people as well.
Seemingly in the twilight of his career, Ollie was unexpectedly approached about a part in a Hollywood blockbuster that was to produce his finest screen performance.
I remember Oliver saying to me, Ridley Scott, they've asked me to come and read. He said, I don't read, I'm a well-known actor. I said, Oliver dear, if you have a chance of getting in this movie, read. Clean the toilet if you have to. Just get on with it and do it.
There he was standing there with his script and saying, God damn it, and he's got his glasses on the end of his nose saying, I can't read the script. And so I was reading with him, and it was fine, but I knew he had it. I knew it was all there, and it wouldn't be a problem. And so I cast him immediately, really.
Well, I think Ridley Scott knew perfectly well, as everybody else who was in the business, that he was actually a very good actor and could do a character role like that extremely well. I think it was good judgment on the part of Ridley Scott.
I am Proximo. I shall be closer to you for the next few days, which will be the last of your miserable lives. And when you die, and die you shall, gladiators, I salute you.
Very often actors, you get an actor on screen and he somehow diminishes, or even sometimes some actors evaporate. It's not necessarily to do with good looks, it's something else. It's some quality which is in them which is larger than life. And that's whereas he just blew, out the screen.
Oh, you should see the Colosseum, Spaniard. 50,000 Romans watching every movement of your sword, willing you to make that killer blow. It rises up like a storm, as if you were the thunder god himself.
You were a gladiator?
Yes, I was.
When he was doing the scene where he was describing what the roar of the crowd meant to him, that was Oliver at his best. That was really brilliant.
Mainly Moody 2, or the occasional 3.
Josephine tells me that they went to dinner one night and he just winked across her. He said, "It's going to be special."
Everyone is unanimous in saying that this would have launched him on to a really serious comeback.
Had he been still with us, I'd have definitely worked with him again. Yeah.
I'm quite sure that Hollywood would have taken notice of him, much more than it had done for years past. And I think he would have possibly had a new and good career because of it.
I bless the director for getting that performance, because it's, the last one. The one that will be remembered, because you're always remembered for the last thing, never the first. And it's a memorial to Ollie, which I love.
The actor Oliver Reed has died. He was taken ill while drinking with his wife and friends in a bar in the Maltese capital Valletta.
I was here in the house about 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, and the phone went and it was Josephine. And she kept saying, he's gone. And I've gone, yeah, okay, so what's happened? And second answer, I knew, she's in floods of tears. No one could act like that. You know, it was just shattering.
I knew as soon as he spoke. He said, Mark, he said, Ollie's dead. It changed the world.
They'd gone into this bar to watch the Grand Prix. It was his day off. And he fancied a few drinks lunchtime. He hadn't drunk for 5 days before that. The worst thing that happened was the ship docked and there were British sailors. It was in Malta. And they came into the bar, saw Ollie, and Ollie playing up to them. You know, here we go, arm wrestling, right? The winner takes this, the loser takes this, right? Next one, there's 15 of them. So, you know if you've got a dicky heart, that is good night.
Ollie had already chosen the spot where he wanted to be buried. A graveyard within walking distance of the local pub. Somewhere he would never be alone.
I think it was the first time I went to Ireland, and Daddy suddenly said, you know, come with me, grab your glass and come with me. And we walked across the road, and where the hell are we going? And we went and just sat in the graveyard where he is now buried. And he said, just wait any moment now. And he looked at his watch, and suddenly just this whole cloud of crows just flew over and just all went to perch in the trees, and just more and more and more came over to join them. It was just perfect because it was a place he used to spend so much time, you know, just crow watching.
And
very bizarre.
The local.
Yeah, opposite the local pub, which helps.
It was a very nice funeral. There were people there who loved him, and the Irish loved him. And I went into the church, and I was sitting there, and the coffin was some yards down into the church. And I walked out of the coffin, said a little prayer and touched it. And when I came back, I was in tears.
She put her arms around me and she said, I do love him. Loved him very much, she said. Whatever people might have thought, she said, I did love him.
And we were sort of in the middle of the cortege, and I couldn't believe it because we went down into a valley, and I looked up the hill, and Ollie was just disappearing in the hearse over the hill that way. And I looked back, and the cars were still coming over the hill behind me. And these were all his friends. Friends from, I don't know where. There were so many. And really, I'm talking about people who are not rich, who'd all made the journey to Ireland.
And I said in the speech, I half expect him to jump out of the box. You know, because that's the kind of work, you know, maybe he spoofed us all this time. And even now, at the funeral, all gathered, he'll jump out of the box and go, right then, got you all here, let's get at it.
Oh, what did I love about him? I mean, I loved him because he was my brother. Pure and simple.
He was a very good-looking guy. Oh, anyway.
There was a very big crowd at his funeral, and Josephine, his wife, cried an awful lot. And very sad we all were. Yeah, I did cry too.
So all I can say is, cheers, Ollie. All the best, love.
Well, cheers, Ollie.
Cheers, Ollie.
That's to Oliver anyway.
Cheers to Ollie.
One to Ollie.
One to Ollie. One to Ollie.
Cheers, Oliver.
Hollywood